So welcome. You're here for Writing and Illustrating Kids Books, the Inside Story partnership event with the Children's Writers and Illustrators of BC and the Vancouver Public Library. My name is Leah. I'm with the Programming and Learning team here at VPL, and I'd like to begin our evening by acknowledging that the Vancouver Public Library does its work on the traditional and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am humbly grateful to be here as an uninvited guest on these lands that have been stewarded by the people of these nations since time immemorial. Tonight, 6 members of the Children's Writers and Illustrators of BC are here to share their knowledge on how they broke into the exciting and competitive field of children's literature. So whether you're just starting out as a writer, or if you've got some experience under your belt already, or if you're just plain curious to get some behind the scenes info, you're in the right place. Our panelists will start tonight by taking turns introducing themselves and telling you a bit about how they got started in their careers. And then we'll have about an hour for Q&A. It's where you can ask all your burning questions about the kidlit industry. Tonight's discussion will be moderated by Ellen Schwartz. We're so delighted to have Ellen back again this year. She's the author of 17 books for children, from picture books to early chapter books, teen novels, and nonfiction. And her latest middle grade novel, The Princess Dolls, won the Western Canada Jewish Book Award for Children and Young Adult Literature. So please join me now in a warm welcome for Ellen.
Thank you, Leah, and hi, everybody. And I'm seeing there's people from all over Canada, like some of you East Coasters are staying up late to join us, which is great. So welcome. As Leah said, we are with the Children's Writers and Illustrators of British Columbia. This is a group of professional authors and illustrators, and we put on this panel every year as a way of reaching out to the general community to share what we know, to share our experience with people who are mostly just getting started in writing and illustrating children's books and want to find out how it works. So how tonight will unfold is I will ask each of the panelists to introduce himself or herself for about 5 minutes max. The panelists know they're going to get yanked if they go over their 5 minutes. And then we will open it up to your questions. So as Leah said, please use the Q&A function in the webinar. And I will go through the questions. And when you ask a question, you can direct it to an individual panelist, or you can leave it open for anyone to answer. I'll review this again when we start the questions and answers, and we'll get through as many questions as we can in the time we have, and then we'll have to wrap it up. And just one last thing before I call on our first panelist, and that is I want to extend my thanks to Richard Banner for creating the poster that we use to publicize this event. Okay, so now I would like to ask Cristy Watson to begin. Go ahead, Cristy.
Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Vancouver Public Library and Leah and Jonna specifically for helping behind the scenes, hosting today's session, to CWILL for your support of this event, and authors and illustrators in general, and of course to the wonderful Ellen Schwartz for bringing us all together today. I'm thrilled to be here, and I want to say kudos to all of the attendees. We hope you leave this evening feeling inspired to continue on your writing journey. The books that are pictured in this slide are my 4 middle grade titles with Orca Book Publishers. On Cue was just released this February in a 2nd edition with a new ultra readable format, meaning it is accessible for all readers, including those with dyslexia. In fact, all of the Orca current titles support young readers who may be struggling with reading or are new to the English language. But of course, the titles are good for all readers of all ages. Next slide, please. And although this is a picture of my current writing space, I actually began writing at the age of 8 at a roll-top desk beside my dad. And though it took until I was almost 48 to have my first book published, For those of you who are just starting with writing at a later age or are still waiting for your big break, keep at it. It was just as sweet seeing my books for the first time on a library shelf at the age of 48 as it would have been had I been in my 20s or 30s. My writing space also shows a lot of what has helped me to become a published author. I have several books on craft. It is a space that I want to come to daily, that motivates me to write. And of course, for me, it offers a lot of natural light. Next slide, please. I also want to share some of the books that I read as a young person because they helped influence how I write today. And probably everyone on our panel this evening will reiterate how important reading is when becoming a writer. Back then, my reading included Beverly Cleary stories for making me laugh, Nancy Drew books for suspense, and Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling. I actually wrote a story in Kipling's style when I was 10 called How the Skunk Got Its Smell, and then I resurrected and reworked it for a newspaper contest in grade 9. The story won third prize and was printed in the newspaper, so maybe I have to amend what I said earlier. I guess I was published at the age of 15, but because the printed article showed a picture of the honorable mention winner and not me, I guess I always felt like it wasn't a full win. But the story does highlight another important thing I have done on my journey to publication, and that is to enter contests. I find they help keep me motivated, they give me inspiration, and once in a while they even pay a little. Robert Cormier was my favorite author in my teen years, and though today's talk's about picture books for younger children, he influenced how I wrote the 4 books pictured in my first slide, and how I wrote the 4 books for teens that have been published with Lorimer Kids and Teens in Toronto. Cormier's books were the first ones where I encountered first-person point of view, and they were realistic stories that brought me into the tale and kept me hooked from the first page through to the last page. I think I'd say that his books were the first ones that made me want to be a writer, and they definitely shaped me as an author. The other 3 books I've added to this slide, My Heart Fills with Happiness, The Fabulous Zed Watson, and The Summer My Father Was 10, also influence how I approach writing picture books and middle grade stories. It's important to read books as a writer, and especially those within the genre in which you hope to be published. Books that are current can also give you a good idea of the market. Finally, being involved with the Surrey International Writers Conference, CWILL, the BC Federation of Writers, and the Writers Union of Canada also assist with honing my craft through workshops and presentations and helping to build my writing career as I network with others. And these connections help me to be involved in writers groups and events just like this, where I'm able to be a part of supporting and encouraging new writers. So thank you for listening, and I am looking forward to the rest of this evening.
Thanks, Cristy. I have that exact same edition of the Just So stories. Okay, next I would like to ask Mark David Smith to share with us.
Oh, hi there. Cristy, I saw that book, I Am the Cheese, on your slide there. That was my absolute favorite book in grade 7. I still remember it so vividly. What a great book. I'm a fairly new writer, I say, in this group of people here, but I've been working like Cristy. I've been working at it a long time. And to give you an idea of just how long, the first time I ever participated in this program was probably around 2005, 6, 7, something like that. And I'm pretty sure Ellen was moderating then too. And I was in the audience, and I have come to know some of the people that I saw there, and so just kind of like Cristy said, it's worth sticking with it. It takes a long time, and once you get into publishing, you'll realize that everything in publishing takes a long time. And I tend to be a very impatient person, so when you are looking at 2 years for a book from acceptance to publication, that's a long time when you've been working at it for so long. So got to be patient. I'm an English teacher by day, so that's my main job. Most of the writers that I know personally have other jobs. They don't just write. I know there are some that do, but that's my job during the day. And I started, I guess, way back in university. I was doing an English degree, and I liked what I read, and I liked to imitate what I read. And I did mostly poetry. So I imagined I was going to be the next great Canadian poet. And, you know, I got a few things published. I won a contest here and there. You know, when you win a poetry contest, the pay is usually something like $10. So that's not a career there. I started writing novels, which, you know, now are unfinished, and then I had kids, and you know, we were suddenly surrounded by picture books, and so I'm reading these picture books, and I'm thinking, oh well, I can do that, right? Those are easy. Look at how short they are. And well, hundreds of rejections later, and 17 years, I would say, before I got my first picture book accepted. So again, you know, you got to stick with it if you want to do that. I got my first novel published. That's this one here. This is a historical fiction novel. It's pretty thin, but this is for 12 to 14-year-olds. I got this published in 2014 as a result of taking a course with the publisher at Tradewind Books. And it was actually a picture book course. This is not a picture book, you know, this is a novel. But in the process of developing that picture book and talking, I mentioned another idea that I'd been reading an art history book, and I came across this fellow Caravaggio, and I thought, oh, this is a very interesting person. What an exciting story. And I'd never heard of him, and he liked the idea. And so I pursued it, and it ended up being my first book that got published. And then after that, I started working on another novel, which I'm still working on. It's probably been, 8 years I've been working on that one, still trying to get that one ready. But in the meantime, I kind of would get bored and I'd write other stories. So then this was my second book. The Deepest Dig just came out actually in August. It's a picture book for 5 to 8-year-olds. Beautiful illustrations by Lily Snowden-Fine, who is like an amazing artist. And while I was talking about that book with the publisher Owl Kids, I had this other story that I had written a long time ago, and the story itself didn't really go anywhere, but I really liked these characters, and I had a new idea, and I just pitched it to them. And on the strength of that pitch, they got me to fill out an outline for them, and I ended up getting a 2-book contract. So I'm in a series contract now. They've just agreed to publish a 3rd book, and this is the new series that comes out next month. The Weird Sisters Detective Agency. So this imagines the 3 witches from Macbeth are trying to turn over a new leaf and solve some mysteries. So, and it's funny, it's like lots of wordplay and references to Shakespeare and things like that. So, so now I've got a series that's started. I'm really excited about this book. I've got a number of other things that I'm trying to work on. And then just 2 weeks ago, I signed with an agent. So this is something that is pretty hard, if you aren't already published. And so that's pretty exciting. That's going to give me an opportunity to send books to other publishers that don't accept, they don't have an open submission policy. All the books that I've had published so far have gone to small publishers that accept unagented submissions. So that's an important place to start, but I'm finding that some of those places are closing their doors recently. I guess because of the pandemic, lots of people have been submitting manuscripts and they're a bit overwhelmed. So that's it, that's me. And I guess I'll turn it back to Ellen.
Thanks, Mark. I can't wait to read The Weird Sisters. That looks just great. Okay. Now we're going to Doug Savage. Doug.
Okay, something. Okay, is it working? It's working. Okay. Hi, I'm Doug Savage. I'm a cartoonist. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, this is a picture of me, what I look like without a beard. This is a picture I take when I do school visits to show the kids that I was once like them, a young person. And then the funny thing about this picture, this guy wanted to be a cartoonist. I used to go to the library with my mom every 2 weeks, and I found Peanuts. I found early on, I found some Peanuts anthologies, and I just ate through them as quickly as I could, and I couldn't wait to get back there 2 weeks later to get the next anthology, and that's how I got into comics, and that's what I wanted to be when I was a grown-up. I wanted to be a cartoonist. I was pretty clear, like right from the get-go. And then I didn't do it. I got an office job. I got into software, and I got a job as a technical writer, which is the evil opposite of cartoonist. And yeah, and I actually forgot how to draw eventually. And then I started getting headaches at work years later. I wasn't drawing. I didn't have any creative outlet in my life. And I started getting these massive headaches at work with these like weird aura patterns that would appear, and have to go lie down in a room somewhere for a while and wait for it to go away, hopefully. Yeah, and then I just kind of lost it one day and picked up a pad of Post-it notes and drew some chickens on it, because that was the only thing I remembered how to draw after years of not drawing. And this is a chicken that I drew during a migraine, that picture there. The chickens are screaming, as I was. Next slide, please. So I drew chickens on Post-it notes, and I made little jokes about my day job, and my coworkers thought they were funny, so I kept doing it. And then I had a Ziploc bag full of these jokes, and I thought, well, people are putting blogs on the internet now. I can do that. I've got a Ziploc bag full of jokes. So I did it. I put it on a Blogger blog at the time, and nobody read it. It was like I had maybe like 10 visitors for the first 6 months, and then suddenly I got featured on my Yahoo as like a link of the day, and then Will Wheaton blogged about me, and then suddenly I was getting hundreds of people, and then thousands, and then tens of thousands, and suddenly like tons of people were reading these goofy comic strips that I was making on Post-it notes, which led to my first book deal, which is Savage Chickens, A Survival Kit for Life in the Coop, which was aimed at grown-ups who also didn't like their day jobs. And it's mostly jokes about working in an office and how terrible it is. And I thought they'd fire me after this book came out, but they didn't. So yeah, that was weird. And then, yeah, and at this point, the website's getting millions of visitors, and people are reading them all over the world. And suddenly I'm a cartoonist like I wanted to be when I was a little kid, and I didn't really set out to do it exactly, but it happened. And then that last picture here is me at San Diego Comic-Con in 2012. So 7 years after I started doodling scruffy chickens on Post-it notes, I was invited as a special guest at San Diego Comic-Con in California, which is like the best gig as a cartoonist that you can get. And it's just like 7 years of doodling and making jokes, and I just couldn't believe it. The whole thing completely changed my life. Next slide, please. And then, so after doing Savage Chickens as a daily strip for many, many years, I ended up sort of accidentally becoming an author of kids comics. So wait, how much time do I have? Okay, I'm good. So I ended up through a series of events in a pitch meeting with Nickelodeon, and I was pitching them a story about a time traveling dog, and about 3 minutes were left in the meeting, and I could tell they hated my idea. They were just, I could tell, I could sense something in the air. So at the last minute, I just blurted, I got this other idea about a moose that shoots lasers out of his eyes. And they were like, yeah, we want to see that. So they sent me away, and I came up with like a pilot episode and a sidekick, and fleshed out the idea in a couple of days, gave them some sample art. and went back to them. And they almost made it into a TV show, but they ended up going with a different idea at the end. But the day that they emailed me to say, you know, we're not going to go with your idea, a publisher I knew got in touch to say, hey, do you have any ideas for kids' books? So I had this pilot thing that I was working on for kids, and I was like, you know, this would make a great kids comic. So I revisited it and fashioned it into the first story in the first book of Laser Moose and Rabbit Boy. This one. Yeah, and I had never, because I was doing daily joke strips, they were just jokes. There was no narrative. The chickens don't even have names. I didn't have names. So this was my first leap into actual narrative stories and full color, which I'd never done before. So it was a huge leap, and I managed to actually pull it off somehow. And yeah, and I've been doing them for a few years, and my fourth one just came out in the fall, Laser Moose and Rabbit Boy as the Deer Flies. So yeah, and it's great. When I was at Fan Expo last month, I met a kid who learned to read from reading my books, and it just blew my mind. It's just like the best thing imaginable. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Doug. That was hilarious. Okay, now we have Marguerite Rurs. Go ahead, Marguerite.
You know, it's funny, I keep hearing words like accidental and contest and rejections, and none of us knew what the other ones were going to talk about. So I'm glad we all have the same experiences. So if I had to give my little talk a title, I would call it the ripple effect of writing. Because I always loved books, even as a child growing up in the Netherlands. I would visit the public library and I'd win school essay contests and devour every book I could get. But I didn't want to be a writer, really. One of my first jobs was to raise baby chimpanzees in a primate center. And everybody always wanted to see the photos and hear my stories about them. So I wrote about it, and a major publishing house in Amsterdam published it. But I still didn't think I was a writer. And then my husband and I immigrated to Canada, and I had to learn a whole new language. So writing didn't happen again for a few years until I had my own kids and I started to make up stories for them. My first two Canadian picture books seemed to come about by accident. But a book called Emma's Eggs was published by Stoddard, which is now Fitzhenry and Whiteside, and it went on to become a bestseller. Writing was easy. The hard part was finding a publisher and finding out how to submit a manuscript and figuring out how things were done, like the fact that a publisher can change the title of your book and that a writer does not necessarily know the illustrator. But I learned to trust them. I lived in the Yukon and there wasn't a whole lot of support yet for writers, and it was pretty isolated. But after about 6 books, the rejections started coming. And by then I did think that maybe one day I could be a writer. So I joined Canscape and CWILL and the Writers Union and the Canadian Children's Book Centre. And I learned more about submitting and about rejections and how to handle contracts. But I also started attending a lot of conferences, often reading conferences in the States. And that gave me a possibility to create a huge network of meeting other writers and publishers in person, booksellers, librarians, educators. And so as I learned more about the craft, I started to coordinate writing workshops for people who also wanted to learn how to write for children. And I started to do a lot more school presentations. And I realized that these paid more. In fact, at least they paid more immediate than royalties sometimes did. So I went back to school. I got a master's from Simon Fraser in children's literature. And I felt that that validated me to do staff workshops in schools. And it also led to more bookings as a conference speaker about my books. And of course, speaking about my books led to more book sales. Ripple effect, right? At least 3 of my books have sold over 100,000 copies. And one, which was, it took me 15 years to write, it was rejected by 17 publishers, and it has now sold over 250,000 copies. So that taught me that we have to believe in our own writing and that we have to be tenacious. I also did volunteer stints whenever it felt natural. One of those was I created an online magazine in which I published writing by kids, often after I did a workshop with them. And because I did this online, that led to an international audience of kids and teachers. And that led to me being invited to my very first international school. I noticed we have somebody here listening in from Indonesia tonight, and that's where I was invited to come and speak at my first international school. And that kind of snowballed through word of mouth from the librarians. And I've been lucky enough to speak at international schools in over 60 countries now, delivering books to kids in the Gobi Desert, traveling with a book bus in Zambia, and much more. And then, of course, traveling led to new ideas for new books. So now I just focus on what I find fascinating and what I want to write about and share with kids. Ultimately, we have to sell that to an adult, an agent, a publisher, a book buying parent, but hopefully they will love it too. And so I keep getting bombarded by ideas. I love doing research and writing news stories. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that writing would enable me to travel the globe and learn so much. Writing has enriched my life in a way that no other job ever could. So I hope that writing will have the same ripple effects for you too.
Thanks, Marguerite. Okay, and our star illustrator, Katarina Oliveira.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. My name is Catarina. I'm from Portugal and I live in West Vancouver, BC. I'm a full-time artist, designer, and illustrator for children's books. People often ask me, did you want to be an artist since you were a kid? And the answer is no. I wanted to be many things, like a vet, simply because I like bugs, horses, and my dog. I also like to read, and books made me dream. At one point, I wanted to be an Egyptologist because I was learning about ancient Egypt through books. No matter what I wanted to be or what I studied for, I want to create books that inspire kids to dream. Slide, please. The second question I get is, what do you do all day? I work at my own studio, and besides writing emails and sending out submissions, I most of the time feel like this little girl when I'm practicing my drawing skills. But it's important to practice because that's like everything, it's how you get better. Also, part of my job is to ask questions about how to tell a story without words. Questions like, what does my character look like? What color is joy or sadness? Usually those answers are not on my computer or at my desk. I love to travel to learn new things, but I'm not traveling much at the moment. So usually I go to the park for inspiration. I like to go to the park to listen to the birds or to watch the dogs and people. Or maybe I go to see a friend, or I go to the library or a museum. Hopefully I come back with some new ideas. When I don't have a specific story to illustrate, I draw something that I like. And if you guessed animals, that's right, that's probably my #1 topic. And that's why I'm showing here this picture of animals with jobs. It's something that I drew just for fun, but that caught someone's attention at a publisher. Slide, please. So when Catherine, an editor at Owl Kids, asked me if I wanted to illustrate a nonfiction book about tiny creatures, I thought, well, that's my dream job. And that answers the question, how did I get to illustrate my first Canadian book called Small But Mighty, written by Kendra Brown and published in 2021. You can see here 2 spreads of the book, but please feel free to visit my website to learn more about it and see the rest of my portfolio. And I hope to answer more questions tonight. So back to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Katarina. That double picture of thinking about drawing and, where the kid is, has that dreamy look, and then drawing and the kid's in tears, that is great. That really nails it. Okay, thank you very much, panelists. This is the most diverse panel I think we've ever had. Got people from all areas of the industry. It's great. Okay, now it's time for questions. Panelists, if you would come back on screen, and I'll start looking at the questions. Okay, from Valeska. Hello, I just finished writing a children's book and have no idea how to get it published. Can you please guide me? Thank you. Okay. Who would like to, anybody want to jump in on that? Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, if you've written a book, a book that you'd like to see published, the first thing I would do is get people to read it, and find people that you can trust to give you honest feedback. I think what really helped me, because of course you write a story, and of course you think it's glorious, and who wouldn't love it, but you show it to some people who have an eye for that, and they can probably point out some things that you'd need to work on. And that's been the case for me right up until, I think yesterday, I had that feedback. So my advice would be to certainly get people to read it, and maybe even look, there are some really good courses at the Writing Center at UBC or at SFU, where you can really start using that manuscript and getting feedback on it, and learning how to craft it in a way that a publisher will really pay attention to. That's what I would advise. Okay. Don't forget to click off your hand. And any other suggestions, panel? Marguerite, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw Marguerite first.
That's okay.
Yeah, I was also going to suggest reading it to other people. Reading it out loud is incredibly important for a picture book and for poetry, to hear the flow, but also to join a group like we have CWILL, and CWILL is not just in Vancouver, it's also on the islands. And Kenscape has groups around Canada. I don't know if Kenscape has critique groups, but I know that the Society of Children's Writers, Book Writers and Illustrators, which I always call SCBWI, but I've also heard it called Squibby. SCBWI is fantastic because they have lists of publishers that are looking for materials or that are accepting by non-agented authors, and they have a lot of local critique groups wherever you live. There is a chance that there is a small group, and if there isn't, start your own little critique group. I have one. I live on Salt Spring Island, where there is not a whole lot of people, but we now have 5 published authors and illustrators, a bookseller, and a public librarian who are in our group to help us critique our stories. And that's incredibly valuable before you even submit it to publishers.
Thank you. Cristy, did you want to add something?
Just a quick one. I reiterate everything that was said before. Definitely the BC Fed of Writers, for those folks coming in from British Columbia, also have writers groups starting up, so you might be able to put your name in there. But I would also add, you know, with the idea of looking up the different publishers, get a sense of what is out there right now, what's current, and get a feel kind of for the market, and that will help you when you have done all the extra work to also know where the best place is for your particular manuscript, because it really is a fit with particular publishers. So that might be something worth considering as well.
That's great, thanks. And I'll just add the Canadian Children's Book Centre, which Marguerite had mentioned earlier when she was talking, is a wonderful organization in Canada that has lots of good resources for new and experienced writers. Okay, Joshua put a question in the chat. I want to understand the exact meaning of a ripple effect of writing, how to manage and balance ideas for your project. Marguerite, do you want to just take a minute to
Yeah, of course. Sure. I can only address that from my personal experience, and I know that will be different for everybody. But early on, when I started to have my books published, I realized that I could either also have, somebody mentioned most writers have a paying job on the side. I could have a different job, like be a teacher or work in a library, or I could do something that was really related to my writing. And I found that over the years, reading my stories in schools, helping in schools, then going home and editing, once I was published, speaking in schools and getting paid for that, and speaking at literacy conferences and getting paid for that, led to books selling more copies. And so it was a ripple effect. Starting my online magazine, in which I published writing by kids, gave me a chance to be in touch with kids, to see what they were writing, but to also edit their writing. I wasn't getting paid for that, but because teachers were using my online resource everywhere, I started getting invited to speak about my books in schools and do writing workshops in schools. And so to me, that has all been a ripple effect where one thing led to another, rather than me working in the deli and writing books on the side. So for me, that has really worked. But I have to say that I had my first books published and able to write because I had a spouse who had a regular income. It's very difficult to make a living as a writer when you're first starting out, because writing doesn't pay much.
Even now. Okay, back to the Q&A. This is from Catherine. Oh, Catherine, I have been submitting for several years. A few years ago, I got rejections, some with encouraging feedback. More recently, I'm not getting a response at all. The emerging trend seems to be, quote, if you don't hear from us, consider yourself rejected. Can you discuss? Okay, who wants to? Anybody? I mean, I've had that experience.
Well, I think she's described it. That is the way it is. You know, the publishers are overwhelmed. They have so many submissions coming in. What I heard, I'm not an editor, so I don't know, but what I heard is that during the pandemic, everybody suddenly, whoever had a dream about writing, suddenly had time and sent in their manuscripts. And so that's what I was saying earlier, is a lot of places that used to have open submission policies have closed their doors. And yeah, it's we said at the beginning, it is competitive for sure.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, that's the way it is. But like we also said, hang in, just hang in. Okay, this is an interesting question from Lisa Sigurgirson. I hope I'm saying that correctly. One thing, I have a few of our manuscripts that are actually children's songs. that I have written that would make great picture books. I'm a singer-songwriter as well. Does anyone know who to reach out to who publishes picture books with music downloads / CDs that go along with them? I don't have a clue. Anybody?
Lisa, Doug might have some information for you, but you and I live on Salt Spring Island, where Rafi lives. I would think that Rafi might be a good source of information for songs and publishing picture books to go with it. But I would say look and see who has published other ones that you can buy. I use Amazon only. I never ever buy anything from Amazon, and I hope you all boycott them. But I use them to see what they offer and who published it and when and what it's about. So it's a great resource to see who else is publishing music and songs like that.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. You really have to look and see in a bookstore or online. Okay, okay, this is a good one. Hi, Katarina, you might be able to answer this. I am currently working on a picture book about a local artist who is also a co-author. Should we submit the text first, or should we submit the text with illustrations? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I can answer. It depends on if the author wants to be traditionally published. If so, the question comes from the artist, right? So
I think it's the author.
Okay, so
I'm not sure.
I'm gonna answer, divide my answer to, if an author wants to submit to publishers to be traditionally published by a publisher, a publishing house, the person just needs to submit the manuscript, no pictures, because the publishing house will decide who's the illustrator is going to be, because they have their portfolio of illustrators and they prefer to decide who's the best choice. If someone is illustrating a book for an author, I'm going to assume that that author wants to self-publish, and is going to take care, is going to pay to the illustrator, and is going to take care of all the costs of printing the book and then sending the book out there. And that's the most costly thing about self-publishing, is then to try to get the book out there, because the big publishing houses have huge connections. Now I can't think of the word, but yeah, that's a bit different. If that person wants to submit the book, I would say no pictures, unless there's a caveat to this. If you write and illustrate your own picture book, then you can submit with some, you don't need to have the book entirely done and a dummy book made, but you can submit illustrations with your manuscript if you're also the artist for the book, and that's fine. But I would say every publishing house has their own submission guidelines, and you should really read those carefully before submitting.
Very, very good advice. Okay. These two, Valeska and Cheryl Ann's questions are similar. My book does not have illustrations. How do I go about it? Where can one get a list of illustrators? Yeah, Marguerite's shaking her head. Don't do it. Just send the manuscript. You're Marguerite, you're muted.
Sorry, that doesn't happen often. Like Katarina said, if you want to be published by a regular publisher, don't look for somebody who can illustrate, because I've been told all my life that publishers will not even read your story. If you're a writer, it's your job to write and edit and rewrite and make it the best possible story it can be. And then it's the publisher's job to create a book. The publisher will look for an illustrator. I have had 40 books published. I have never had to pick an illustrator. I don't know most of the illustrators of my books. Some live on the other side of the world. Sometimes I get to see sketches of what it will look like. I try to find other books they've done to get a sense. But I don't get asked if I like it. I do, especially for nonfiction books, I get to see it before it's published and find the mistakes. That happens a lot when it's nonfiction. It has to be incredibly accurate. And a lot of my books are global stories about other countries. And if I've been there, I can pick up the mistakes that an illustrator may have made. But then even then, I don't talk to the illustrator directly. I talk to my editor at the publishing house, who passes it on to an illustrator. So hopefully that will put your mind at ease. You don't need to worry about it. A publisher is out to make the most beautiful, sellable book. They're gonna love the book as much as you do. And I've learned to trust illustrators and publishers.
Great. Okay, there's a couple questions about getting an agent. Is it possible? How do you go about it? So I think Mark and Margriet, I don't know if any of the others of you have agents. Oh, okay, Doug, why don't you go ahead?
Right. I've had two agents. I have my current agent. But my first agent I got by accident. I was doing my comic for a while and she got in touch with me, and then I ignored her email for way too long because I just thought it was some junk mail. And she actually turned out to be with a really reputable agency. So, and I got her because, and this goes back to the ripple effect that Marguerite mentioned. So my agent, she was at a party in San Francisco and she was eavesdropping on the conversation next to her. Some people were drinking martinis and they said the phrase "savage chickens." And she was like, what's that about? So she just kind of inserted herself into the stranger's conversation. And it came out that they were at a concert the night before and the woman on stage said, "You guys should read Savage Chickens." And that's how you get an agent.
Thanks a lot.
But my second agent I got deliberately. I wanted to get an agent focusing on kids lit. So I actually tried this time, and and the thing I did is what everybody should do: find agents who are representing artists that are similar to you, or who are writing books that are similar to yours, who have similar work in their portfolio, and but maybe not something exactly like yours. That you might bring something extra to the table, and then figure out who they represent now, and do you know any of them? Or do you know somebody who knows them? So I really like the look of Andrea Brown Agency. And it turned out that a guy that I met at the Vancouver Comic Arts Festival was represented by one of these agents. And I didn't say, please introduce me to your agent. I just messaged him on Facebook and basically said, have you had a positive experience? Would you recommend being with this agency? Do you like them? Are they helpful? And he told me all this cool stuff, and he said, I can introduce you.
Nice.
So I didn't have to submit stuff through the website and all that stuff. It was just through connections I made through building a community of fellow artists and writers. And that is how a lot of this happens. It's connections you make and being good to people and having a good reputation, and things happen.
Great.
Yeah, so that's how I got my agents.
Okay, why don't you go ahead, Mark?
Yeah, I just would like reiterate that it's sort of designed serendipity, but I was just going to suggest that there are lots of times where there are conferences like the Surrey International Writers Conference where agents will be present. They'll do manuscript reviews. You pay them a small fee, which is number one, is worth the feedback that you're getting. And number two, you're meeting them and they're getting to know you, because an agent, they're not just interested in your great story, they're interested in the stories you haven't yet written. And they want to know if you're a person they actually like, do they even want to be around you for a while? So you're getting to meet them. I did this a year or two ago with a manuscript. I met an agent who was doing this online thing, and he critiqued my manuscript. Wasn't interested in it, but we got along great. And so when I submitted something else to another agency, or to that agency, different agent, I was able to say, hey, I met this person, and he was able to say, oh yeah, I met him. He's a nice guy, whatever. At least I assume that's what he said. I don't know. And lo and behold, they liked this other piece, and I did get it. But it started with that connection. And I just wanted to go back to something Marguerite was talking about with the illustrators, people looking for illustrators, and how, you should really just submit the manuscript. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're a new writer, the publisher probably wants to pair you with an established illustrator, because that illustrator has an audience already of people that like their books. As a new writer, nobody knows who you are, so they're not likely to put a new writer with a completely new illustrator that don't have that following already. So that's just another reason why it's good to just submit the text and let the publisher figure the illustration out.
Okay. Marguerite, do you have anything that hasn't already been said about
I think so, because I've been writing for 40 years. I feel like I'm the really old timer here.
Oh, no, me.
But for 40 years, I never had an agent. And I had publishers in Canada and in the US and in the Netherlands. And I felt that I didn't really need an agent because I had a personal relationship built up after all these years. I knew the editors and they knew my books, and I thought I was doing fine. But then I'd be envious about other writers who were talking about my agent. And I thought, oh, it'd be so nice to not have to keep track of all my submissions and who's paid me and, all these things. It'd be so much easier to have an agent to do all that. So then I would ask other writers and I'd say, do you have an agent? And one would say, oh, best thing I ever did for my career was get an agent. And the next author I would ask would say, oh, best thing I ever did for my career was get rid of my agent. And I thought, what do I do? Do I need an agent? But I did come to a point where I was writing so much, and I have different publishers, and I kept coming across one agent that I really liked. And so one day I just emailed her out of the blue, just from her website. It turned out she knew this ripple effect. She knew my books because she had been selling the foreign rights for some of them. And she was happy to take me. And so I thought, I guess now I have an agent. It hasn't done anything yet. I really admire her knowledge, her connections. She knows way more than I do about publishers. So I'm hoping to benefit from it. But for 40 years, for 40 books, I didn't need one. So I think it's a very personal one. It's also, can you afford to spend 15% of your meager income on having somebody else do it? I got to a point where I said yes, but before that, I was happy doing it myself.
Okay. And also, I just want to add that most agents, well, I think this is true, aren't going to take on unpublished writers. So going back to Mark's original piece of advice, which is to start with small local publishers, get yourself some credit, and then you can, once you've got a bit of a name. Okay, back to the questions. This is Marianne, when you send a manuscript to a publisher, how do you write or include ideas for an illustrator? Katarina, do you want to? Yeah.
Sure, it's easy enough. You don't.
Yeah.
It's very easy. You don't. If you have a really good relationship with the editor or someone that if someone already said yes to your manuscript, we love it, let's talk about it, and you have like a personal relationship, you might say something, but submitting, you don't have to.
Yeah. The only exception to that is if you're writing a wordless book, right? Then you have to describe.
Even a wordless book as a manuscript. So you still don't need to suggest an illustrator.
You don't need to suggest what the illustrations will show. You mean?
No,
just...
that's called illustration notes, and that's further away in the process, and that also depends. I see. After the book is accepted to become a book, the manuscript is going to be a book. It's a teamwork, so it's all about the dialogue between the writer and the illustrator and the editor, and usually even more people, because then there's the designer. So it's teamwork, and everyone wants one thing: the book to be the best. So, but for submissions, just follow the guidelines.
Yeah. Good advice. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one. Not sure if I understand the question, but I'll read it. This is from Cami. Hello, I have a script, some key art moments, and character design pages I made for a children's book story about cleft lip. Well, I don't think the subject matter is important, that I did as a concept art project in Vancouver Film School. What would be the best way to arrange all my work to send to publishers? Doug, do you have any help with that? You're muted. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no. Like if you have character design and everything all set, it's almost like you're being writer and illustrator. So I think if the duties are going to be split up, then you should just keep the other stuff to yourself and focus on the writing or the character design, whichever part of it you think is you need to be involved in. Like it's tough for me because I'm a writer and illustrator. I'm a control freak and I do it all myself. And I have an editor who tells me what to do sometimes, but yeah, I guess I don't play well with others. Yeah, but I don't know how you would package that up properly. I think you have to be careful of the whole, publishers who want to assign their own illustrators. They're not going to want to see your character designs and stuff. And if it's like a really elaborate character design, they're like, are they designing a book, or are they thinking of this as an animated show? If it's really exhaustive character design where you're doing all the angles and everything, yeah, just stay focused on the thing that's most important to you. If it's the story, then knock the story out of the park and say, I also have a few sketches if you'd like. And if they say yes, we like, then put them in your pitch. When I pitched Laser Moose originally, I think I had 3 drawings in it. It was like really bare bones. Yeah, but yeah, focus on your strength and focus on the part that's most important to you.
Good. Okay, this is an interesting one from Sally. I've worked on my sci-fi fantasy book for middle grade readers, had it peer reviewed, kid reviewed. Oops, wait a second. Oh, here it goes. Kid reviewed, taken classes, conferences. What else can I do? Okay, so you've worked this quite a bit. Cristy.
It sounds like maybe you are at a stage where it is ready to start querying various publishers. So it might be worth finding the publishers that are a good fit, doing some of the research around what publishers are publishing middle grade fantasy, Does your book fit the length of what they're looking for middle grade fantasies, etc.? And maybe then start working on the chapter by chapter synopses, because often when querying, publishers are also going to ask for a chapter by chapter synopsis of the entire novel, and then perhaps the first 1 to 3 chapters, depending on the publishers. So it would be good to make sure you have those nailed down and ready as well. You might even want to have editors look at those too, just to make sure you've got them done in the ways that are ready for publishers.
Great. Mark, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just add start on the next book, because I've heard both editors and agents say that sometimes, you know, they'll read a book, they might not like what it is for them, for their publishing house, but then the next question they're going to ask is, what else have you got? And it's nice to have something else to show them as well. So.
It's a great point. It's a great point. And then you're not sitting there agonizing. Okay, from Cami, if I want to publish my book in my home country, Mexico, in Spanish, but I also would like to publish it in Canada in English, is this possible? Are publishers okay with having the same story just in different languages? Catarina, do you have experience with that? Have you published in?
No, yes, I have books published in Portuguese, but not the same. So usually with translations is the publisher that sells the translated book to another country. So I don't know about having a book that was already published in Mexico and then you want to submit the story to a Canadian publisher. I don't know how that would work. It depends on the contract that you sign with the Mexican publisher, because they take care of all the translations. But I do have Small but Mighty translated to Turkish, so that's fun.
which was arranged by the publisher.
Yes.
With a Turkish publisher. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Marguerite, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, totally. I think you need to focus on whatever is your first language to write it in, whatever language you're most comfortable in, and see if you can get it published either in Canada or in Mexico. And then, like Catarina said, the publisher sells the rights to other countries and has it translated. But that said, since you're English and Spanish, there's a lot of schools in the United States that are looking for picture books that are published in dual languages. So the Spanish would be on the left side and the English would be on the right side with the same illustrations. And I know there's a huge need for that. So if I were you, and if you can do that, I would look for publishers in the US online and see who is publishing books in 2 languages and what do they need, and contact them and see if you can get a foot in the door that way.
Yeah, I think this is a trend. Cristy?
Just based on what Marguerite said, I do know Lee and Lowe publishers in the US are doing a number of books in Spanish and English, so they might be a publisher to look for there. And then, of course, as Catarina said, the rights are sold from Canadian publishers, but I do know Orca Books do a lot in sell the rights for French and Spanish for a number of their books. So that might be a Canadian publisher as well. But I loved Marguerite's idea about, you know, doing it in the language you're most comfortable with first and foremost.
Yeah. Catarina?
Just wanted to add that maybe a huge market of publishers, the educational publishers that only do educational books, and that's a good place to look to for bilingual stories.
Great idea. Aren't we helpful? I'm telling you. Okay, Mary Beth, I'd like to ask for any advice as to how to get on the publisher's roster of illustrators. I've only done some work on self-published picture books. Okay, illustrators here. What have you got to say? Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing we haven't really touched on is social media. And I think if you're an illustrator and you have an Instagram and you have a regular schedule where you're posting something every second day or every Friday, and you're building an audience for your work, that's one of the best things you can take to a publisher is like, here's my Instagram and I have 4,000 followers, because they think our risk is reduced because you have X number of followers already. So anything you can do to help a publisher feel comfortable about their risk is great. So if you have 10,000 Twitter followers and 5,000 people on Instagram, these are great numbers to take to a publisher, and they are still impressed by these things. I know people who have had book deals just based on their Instagram accounts, and it also shows you can produce regularly, and maybe when you don't feel like it because you're on a schedule, you publish something every Friday, and you build an audience for your work. And this is something you can do yourself with help from nobody, and it still shows that you are a consistent, reliable. It gives a great sense of your work and like the breadth of your work and different styles that you can do. And yeah, it's the best thing that you can do to just promote yourself on the internet. So do it.
Okay.
now and don't don't worry about using up all your ideas on the internet, because you'll just come up with more better ideas.
Katarina, did you have something else?
Yes, so I'm gonna disagree with Doug because
that's okay.
because I don't want to feel I don't want people to be discouraged about the social media numbers, because I got a book and I had 1,000 followers, if that many. That's very pretty. The numbers are pretty if you're Doug, because he's big and he has thousands of followers, and that's great. That's a great badge, but it's not important, and publishers don't look at that.
Oh, that's funny. I for my first book deal, I took in like charts showing my traffic growth over time, and like
it's all personal.
They love that stuff. But
well, they do,
it really
but if
depends.
it's not there, it's not a problem. It's not something that will stop a publisher from hiring someone.
I think it's more important that it shows your consistency and that you can produce
the algorithm and the app likes consistency. It's not the publisher.
Oh, really?
It's how you get.
Right, well, let's leave this.
But okay, forgetting social media, let me just say how you get in the rooster. You say hello, you submit. I said hello to people of all kids. The publisher that hired me for the first time, no one knew me, no one knows me still, but I said hello to them every book launch. And before the pandemic, I looked for them to try to build a relationship, and I submitted to them. So they also you find a publisher that you like because you think you're gonna fit, and then you look for the email and you try to connect that way.
Yeah. Okay, good. This is from Lisa again. Does being published as a columnist for 8 years once a month count as being published when giving publishers info about you? Anybody have a thought on that?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I saw that question by Lisa, and I was going to say, yeah, whenever I did a writing workshop was just like this, with people who want to be writers, I would say, put together a little bio of yourself, just something short and sweet, and look at anything that is writing related. It doesn't matter what you've written, but the fact that you've been writing for 8 years is very important. If you've had a column in a newspaper, use that. If you haven't, maybe send a few stories to something like Parent Magazine or Island Living and see if they'll publish it. And then you have some stuff. And the more you get, the more you can drop off less important things. But working with children, if you're writing picture books, especially somebody mentioned a medical issue, if that's your work and you've dealt with that for years and you know kids, make sure you explain that, because that's important.
Yeah, good. Okay, all right, panelists, here comes the question from M. Adelaide. And excuse me for this question, LOL, but is it profitable? Now, I think you've just had your answer from our reaction, but maybe somebody should begin by just explaining how people get paid. Cristy, go ahead.
Well, certainly we haven't had the issue of or question around contracts come up, but obviously when you are hired by the publisher, either as an author or an illustrator, there will be a contract, and we often will get an advance first and then a percentage of royalties. And I know when I first was published, my first book of 8, I had assumed that meant I got a percentage of the $9.95 that it went for on the back of the book. Quite a shock to discover, no, not at all. It's what it's selling for to the retail markets. That's where you're getting your percentage. So, 8 or 10% isn't a lot to start with, but as you build relationships with your publishers and maybe can have more and more works published, then you at least will have perhaps an ongoing set of advances and royalties that are spread over a 2-year period. And we are very fortunate in Canada to have both the PLR, public lending rights, and access copyright. And I must say I rely on those as well to augment and supplement part of our earnings. So we are very fortunate to have those two pieces as well, and I'll maybe let other panelists share more on that.
Marguerite, did you have something to add? You're muted.
Sorry. The 10% is when there are no illustrations. I'm mostly a picture book writer, so I get 4 to 5%. But then the picture book comes out as a $20 hardcover, usually first. And that's all up to the publisher, how it comes out, hardcover, softcover, if they ever do a paperback. Those are not decisions we have to make, they do. So yeah, you have to sell a lot of books. And over the years, I think I've realized that what is more important, you're not going to get a higher percentage. It's standard. But what is more important is that your book stays in print. So a reputable publisher who will guarantee that your writing will stay, that they will keep reprinting the book, is incredibly important. And that in your contract, if you ever get to sign a contract, if that publisher ceases to exist, the rights revert back to you. If they don't, they become an asset of the company that is going into receivership. But if you get the rights back, you can sell those rights to another publisher. So having a picture book sell for 20 years, it does add up. It's peanuts when your first check comes, but over 20 years, it does add up. So the more you write, start writing your next book, because the more you write, the more eventually you're going to get paid.
Right. And I just want to add, when Cristy was talking about receiving an advance, the advance that the publisher pays you is against your future royalties. So however much the publisher gives you in an advance, you don't earn any royalties until the publisher has earned back that much in income. So just to clarify that. Okay, let's see, we have time for just a few more. From Anita. I'm working on a picture book biography of a contemporary Canadian figure. I've finished the story. Should I include an information page about their religion and their ethnic group's immigration to Canada, which were key parts of their life, before I start submitting to publishers? Or is that something that is asked for by an editor if accepted? So I guess you're asking, should you include information about the subject's religion and ethnic background, or the story of that ethnic group's immigration to Canada? Anybody have a thought? I would think if it's
maybe
germane.
I did a picture book about a famous Canadian. And yes, at the back of it's a very simple picture book story, but at the end, there are 2 pages of information, biographical information. I worked with Robert Bateman on making sure that he was happy with the text. But if ethnic and religion are important to your story, I would say yes, that needs to be included. But I would also say yes, an editor will tell you that once you have it submitted. I submit that, you know, there's 2 ways that you can send a manuscript to a publisher. You can query before you even write it and see if they're interested in that person and your story, or you can write the whole thing and send it, you know, finished. It's still gonna have 2 years of editing after you finish, but so yeah, an editor will then say, you know, this needs to be part of it. If it's important to that story, I would include it.
Yeah, and just to clarify, whether you query first or send the manuscript first, check the publisher's submission guidelines, because some publishers want the whole thing. Some publishers just want a query, as Cristy was talking about. Some publishers want a synopsis and sample chapters. So just check that out and do what they say. Okay, now here's I'm not going to read the question exactly, but someone asked about piracy. How do you keep control of your content and your copyrighted material? Anybody? Mark?
Yeah, my first publisher, he told me, he laughed because I remember asking, somebody asked the same question. He said, nobody wants it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about somebody stealing it. The publishers are not going to steal your manuscript. They don't even want it. Like we heard earlier, people aren't even getting replies from the publishers. They've got more manuscripts that they know what to do with. So you don't need to worry about that. And the truth is, if you have written it, you have a copyright on it. It's yours. You know, I mean, it's easy to prove that it's your writing. If, you know, by some chance somebody were to steal it and pretend that they wrote it, you know, the file on your computer is dated. The email that you sent it when you tried to submit it to somebody has a date on it. So there's really no risk of that happening. What you really need to focus on is making your story so good that they can't say no to it. That's it.
Good. Okay. M. Adelaide again, is it too expensive to publish for myself and get the 100%? Have any of you self-published? Has anybody done that? I haven't. But I can tell you from what I know that, well, okay, go ahead, Marguerite, I won't. But
in my head.
Yeah, sorry, I think Cristy wants to.
Oh, that's
comment.
okay.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I would say anybody can self-publish nowadays with desktop publishing, and Friesen Press is fantastic. But you have to ask yourself, what do you want? Do you want to be a writer, illustrator, or do you want to take inventory and haul boxes of books to publishers and try to get them out there? And then you probably still have to pay a distributor to help your books get out in the world. Those are all things that publishers do. Nobody gets rich on books. It sounds like I'm going to get 100% if I self-publish, but really the 100% is a $10 book. 10% goes to the author and the illustrator. 40% goes to the bookstore that runs all their costs and personnel and inventory on that. So that leaves 50% to pay for the paper and the printing and the shipping and the promotions and everything else. Publishers do not make a lot of money. It's that whole team effort and the fact that they know what they're doing that gets our books out there. So yes, you can self-publish, but do really study it seriously and talk to some people who sank $50,000 into producing a book, and it's now sitting in boxes in their garage. But it can also be done very, I don't know if you know the picture book, The Jolly Postman. Jonathan Allen Alberg self-published that because it was too expensive to produce. They sold $1 million worth of books, and then it was snapped up by a publisher after that. So it can always be done, but is that what you want to do?
Okay, Cristy, we're going to add, and then I want to turn it back to Leah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I've done some support and editing for a number of folks who are self-publishing, and there are a lot of hidden costs, but most, I guess one of the most expensive parts they've discovered is advertising and trying to get yourself out there, because even on social media, even on Amazon, there are costs that are maybe not set up front, they're kind of hidden, but they are all around advertising so that people do see your book. And as Marguerite said, with trade publishing, that part is handled by the publisher. So although you might receive close to 100% of returns for self-publishing, you are still putting the money out to pay for an editor, to pay for someone to do the cover for your book, to pay for marketing, etc. So just wanted to add that in there, but either way, good luck with the projects for sure.
And on that cheery note, I want to, panelists, thank you so much. What a great job. Audience, thank you for your great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. I told you this would fly by. It's just amazing. Okay, back to Leah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It does really fly by. And I want to let everyone in the audience know, don't leave quite yet. We've got something here for you that the panelists have so kindly put together. It is a resource list. So everybody compiled some of their favorite resources to share. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Ellen, for moderating excellently again this year. And thank you so much to all the panelists for taking time out of your evenings to share your expertise with us. It's something that only you really know. So we're super grateful to have you and grateful for you to have shared that with us this evening. I will leave the screen up here for a few more minutes so folks can read it and take notes as you wish. And then I'll bid you all good evening. Thank you so much again for coming, and hopefully see you very soon.